Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Quirked, here bringing you the third game of the Lichess4545 League game reviews. And once again, we're moving up in the world. Our last video was a board 4 game. Here we have a board 3 game between the TheRatRiverTrapper, who has a great name, I have to say, and VicPez. And this is a super exciting game because it comes out of one of the most interesting openings that I know. And I actually have some experience in this opening, so I think this is just a really interesting game. So TheRatRiverTrapper goes e4, and I was reading through the game chat, and apparently this is not his usual choice. I don't know what he usually plays, but I was told that in the chat that he does not usually play 1e4, and that actually T-Mouse, who's one of the highest rated people in the Lichess4545 League, helped him prepare a very specific line against what Black plays. So we see the French and the French Tarrasch. And here Black goes knight f6, which is the closed variation of the Tarrasch. You can also play c5, this is the open Tarrasch, and I see that a lot of the time at top level. This is what grandmasters are playing. I tend not to like these positions for Black so much because Black generally just tends to suffer after e takes. The main move here is queen takes. E takes is playable, but you get a isolated queen's pawn for not a ton of compensation. So I think these queen takes lines make sense, and after knight f3 takes, bishop c4, the queen is supposed to go to d6. I don't know why. I don't know the theory of this very well. And castles, white's going to play knight b3 and regain the pawn very nicely. And white just has a good position here. Black is very solid. He doesn't have any weaknesses. And that can maybe be the appeal of this line for the Black side. Black just gets a solid position and looks to outplay white from here. But I think white is... I like white's position here. I don't like Black's position. And I think, especially for non-titled player-level chess, playing the closed Tarrasch makes more sense because Black has more active options in these lines. So e5 makes sense. You gain space with a tempo. Knight d7, c3. The moves c3 and bishop d3 are sort of interchangeable here. They usually lead to the same position. White does have some alternatives, the most notable being f4. And this can lead to some crazy sharp lines, which both white and Black really need to know what they're doing here. Because I'll quickly showcase the line. It's very, very dangerous, really, for both players. Knight c6, knight d, f3. This is usually played because if you go knight g, f3, this knight tends to have trouble finding a square. The knight going to b3, it's not really a great piece on b3. So we put this knight on f3, queen b6. And here, it may look a little strange, but the main move is g3. The problem is if you go knight e2, you start to have some problems developing this bishop. So g3 is aimed at potentially developing this bishop, or, as we'll see later, it seems far-fetched right now, but the king actually winds up on g2. So takes, check. King f2 is sort of forced because if you block with the bishop, your d4 pawn is hanging, so king f2. And here Black goes g5. And the point is Black is trying to break down the king side, so there will be pressure. White should take, and then we abuse the pin. And this is a position that can arise. And this is what I mean, the variation is hyper sharp. Here White goes king g2, and it's a position. I mean, it's a total mess. It's hard to say who's better. So that is the main alternative to this move, c3. is to play for the big center, but it gets very complicated very quickly. c3, totally fine, it's the main line. c5, bishop d3. This is what I mean by the variations transposing. Bishop d3 and c3, they're both the same. Knight c6, knight e2. This knight comes to e2 in order to provide this knight a square on f3 so that both knights can support the d4 pawn. Otherwise, white can have some issues with queen b6, and all of a sudden there's a lot of pressure on d4. So knight e2, the main move, takes, takes, and f6. And this is the point of black's play. Black is going to immediately pressurize e5, and he's using a tactical trick here to prevent white from supporting the e5 point. Because what white would love to do is play f4 and maintain this structure here. So if black were to take and take, that would be a very desirable structure for the white player, because white just has lots of space and black has trouble coming up with a clear plan. However, this is actually tactically unsound, because after takes, black has the nasty shot knight d4. And I'm using the fact that you haven't castled yet. So after you take, I'm going to give this check, and I'm going to regain the knight, and black has a good position here. So after f6, the whole point of this variation is that white cannot play f4. It's a bad move. And the main line continues, e takes f6, knight takes f6, and white will argue that this is a backwards pawn. I have a good position, I have a positionally sound position, and black will look for play on the dark squares on this diagonal and down the f-file. Black has dynamic piece play. So this is a position where it's sort of a static advantage for white versus the dynamic play for black. However, after f6, the white player, TheRatRiverTrapper, opted for one of the most interesting variations in the French trash. And this is a really fun variation. It also wins the award for having one of the best opening names. White goes for the Salto Mortale. This is known as the Salto Mortale variation, which means in English, the deadly leap. And this certainly looks like a deadly leap. The reason this move is so appealing is this move f6, whenever you move a pawn, you leave weak squares behind. So the move f6 has weakened the light squares that the f7 pawn used to protect. It's weakened e6 and g6. So this is an incredibly logical move, immediately taking aim at both the weakened squares. And if black has to play a move, such as queen e7 to defend the e6 pawn, this is really not what black wants, because now black has big developmental issues here. So after, for instance, takes, queen takes, knight f3, actually I've hung this, so let me do better. Let me just go knight f3 right away. And you have a sort of clogged up position. Yeah, I mean, you can take this, certainly, but I'll play knight takes, and it's unclear. I don't like black's position because black has a hard time unwinding his pieces here. And you have to be worried about this check at all times, whether or not that's a problem for you. So queen e7 is not what black wants, just making his development very difficult. But after knight f4, you do have to protect e6. You can't let this like central pawn in the heart of your position just drop. But luckily for black, or maybe not luckily, but skillfully for black, black has a nice dynamic way to play in this position. And that is to take on d4. And you may be asking yourself, well, has white just blundered his center pawn? And the answer is no. White surely has prepared this variation, because remember that this knight was taking aim not just at the weakened e6 square, but also at the weakened g6 square. And that means that white has this nasty move, queen h5 check. And the point is, because this knight is pointing at g6, after g6 you're going to run into some problems. In fact, you're going to run into a lot of problems. Because this bishop also attacks g6. So this is just unplayable. So after queen h5, really the only move is king e7. And now we see the point of white's play, which is knight g6 check, forking king and rook. Now, I will say that this is considered... Let me try and speak English again. This is considered slightly theoretically inaccurate. It is considered better to take on f6 first, and only after knight takes f6, go knight g6. And I'll show you why in the game continuation. So after knight g6 check, h takes g6, only move, ef6. Here, black played knight takes f6, which transposes into the variation that we saw. But black actually has the very interesting option of going king f6 here. And the point of this is after queen h8, king f7. We reach the game position, but the knight, instead of being on f6, is still on d7. And this leads the knight to have an extra option, and it's a good option, of showing up on c5. So, for instance, just to show a sample line of how play might continue in this position, castles, knight c5, this wins a tempo on the bishop. The bishop doesn't really have a good square, so you have to go bishop b1. And after e5, black actually has good play, strong knights. This bishop is open. This bishop will find its way into the game eventually, maybe on e7, maybe on d6, maybe even on c5 on a good day. And black just has a nice position because of these two powerful knights. So, this knight g6 move is considered slightly inaccurate because we want to force black to play knight f6. I should mention that if black dares to go king f6 here, there's going to be some issues with skewers. So this is actually lost. On queen h4 check right away, there's maybe g5, but I can throw this one in. Takes, queen h4 check. Now if you go g5, I take and have a skewer the other way. Some fun geometry here. The king is just on the worst square in the world. So after ef6, knight f6 is forced, but we actually get the same position in the game because black chooses knight f6. And after queen h8, black must cover this pawn, so king f7 is forced. And here we have to stop and take stock. What has happened here? Okay, white has won an exchange. And in return for the exchange, black has a knight and a pawn. But we can't just look at what's left the board. We must look at what stayed on the board, because that's what we're going to be playing with. So let's look at the rook that white has. Is that such an imposing piece right now? No, clearly not. Let's look at the knight and pawn that black have. Are these imposing pieces? Well, yes, these are very strong pieces on the board. These are some of black's best pieces. So, it's clear that black has very real compensation for the exchange. And here, white shows to me that he really knew quite a bit about this variation by playing the book move queen h4. You might be tempted to castle here. But here black has this extra option. It's a little bit of a tricky option of going knight h5 and saying your queen is a little stuck here. Now, this is not objectively good for black. White always has enough play to guarantee an advantage and guarantee that the queen's not getting trapped. But I don't know. I wouldn't really want to play this way as white. The engine's like this for white, but I always feel a little bit uncomfortable with my queen so brazenly out of play here. So I like white's decision to go queen h4, and there's a reason that queen h4 is more popular than castles. Just getting the queen back into the game, saying, I'll castle next move. And here, black plays quite a bad move. Remember what we were talking about, what's good about black's position? Well, black has a strong pawn and knight here. So we want to accentuate these things. We want to show how good these things are. When I have a position, I always want to prove that what's good about my position is really good. And I want to improve what's bad about my position. That seems so obvious, right? You're like, of course. But so many times I see people make decisions that run against this idea. So we've already talked about these are great pieces for black. Okay, what's bad about black's position? Well, this bishop is quite bad, right? This rook hasn't been developed yet. This queen is a little bit passive. So here, the queen is throwing a punch at my good knight. Do I want to move my good knight? No. He's great. I want him to stay there. Meantime, I have this terrible bishop on c8. Well, can I kill two birds with one stone here? Absolutely. I go e5. I've protected my knight without moving it, and all of a sudden, he doesn't look so bad. His eyes have been opened on the diagonal. Now he's a much better piece. So this move e5 really is screaming to be played here because it does two great things for black's position. And black instead chose the much inferior knight f5. And the reason this is so much inferior is you're wasting time and you're allowing white to take your best piece, which white promptly says, thank you. Thank you very much. I wanted this knight off the board as soon as possible. And black gets to straighten his pawns. Black has the bishop pair, but black also has a big problem in this position. And the problem, actually I would say black has two big problems in this position. The two big problems for black are, first, now this bishop is really bad. You've put another pawn on a light square. Now there's this construction that's making black's c8 bishop very, very bad. And the other problem that black has is he has serious issues with control of the e5 square. So if you give me 3 moves, I'm going knight f3, castles, rook e1, and I'm just gonna like slam my pieces down on the e5 square. So white castles, which is a good move. I might have been tempted to start with the move knight f3, but it should reach roughly the same position. So castles. And again, black plays a bad move here. I feel like black didn't really understand the issues with his position, and he kept making one-move threats without focusing on the long-term prospects of the position. Black goes bishop e7. This is not to the point. What's the problem with black's position? He's lacking control of e5. So what's the sort of obvious move here? Bishop d6. I need to control e5. And now if you go knight f3, I can go e5. Because I guarded this square. And bishop e7, black is lining up with the queen, but is there a threatening knight discovery? Not really. What can you make a discovered attack on? Nothing. So white continues to show that he has a good grasp of this position. He goes knight f3, locking down e5. And Like, this is not a pleasant move to face. In fact, that's a highly unpleasant move to face, with the knight just slamming down on e5. Very unpleasant. So black goes knight e4. This was sort of the point, right? You put the bishop on e7 to get this discovered attack. But, okay, what have I accomplished here? White just says, okay, I moved my queen. So black seems to be seriously lacking the strategic understanding of this position and not understanding what's wrong with his position, this bishop and this square. And I think white is strategically winning here. After something like king g8, I get exactly what I wanted. My knight comes to e5. I mean, at some point I can even play f4 to just really control this square. This bishop is forever bad because you can never play e5. White has a great position. But after queen h5, black decided to walk the plank, king f6. And as soon as I see this, my alarm bells go off. Because what I notice here is that the black king has no squares. I cover every square around the king. And this is a topic we're going to be talking a lot about in this game, is when you're attacking, it's all about covering squares. So if you'd like, pause your video and decide how you would continue for the white player here. So white is actually just winning here, but it takes a little bit to realize what the winning move is. So, as always, we want to look at checks, captures, and threats. That's what we always want to look at when we're looking at forcing moves. So, first move I look at, queen h4 check. And then I realize, okay, we just repeated the position. That's not useful to me. So that's not a good move. Second move I look at, bishop g5 check. Right? That's developing a piece with a check. Seems like a good move. Takes, queen takes, king f7, knight e5, king g8, and I'm not getting mated as black. Does my position suck? Yes, it does. But I haven't been mated. And when I see the king step up to f6, I feel like I should be mating, honestly, because he has no squares. So now I start to look at other moves. I don't have any realistic captures, like that's just not a move. So I'm going to start to look for threats. And what I realize is if I can give a check without being blocked or captured, it's mate. So the move that immediately jumps out to me is bishop f4. And I'm just threatening mate. And this takes a little bit of calculation, because at first glance, it looks like bishop d6 should solve your problems. But this is where your pattern recognition comes in. Hold on, the bishop went to d6? Now I've got an open line. So now I'll play bishop g5. And guess what? You lost your queen. Because of your lack of development. The queen is hanging. So, okay, after bishop f4, we cannot play bishop d6. That loses on the spot. Okay, let's try giving my king squares. I'll go g6. And now, the best move is not to check. This is still winning, don't get me wrong. Like, white is still winning here. But black is allowed the opportunity to march out of the net. So, when you're attacking, you want to control the squares around the king. That is what will lead you to mate. So here, I just go queen h7 and say, I'm going to mate you again. And eventually black has to sort of give up and just sack the pawn to give himself a square. But I mean, this is just a disaster. So here, after king f6, white missed just a winning shot in bishop f4. If you said b3, that's also good. The reason that bishop f4 is stronger is that it prevents blocking with e5. Or it makes it more difficult to block with e5, shall we say. So king f6, in the game bishop g5 check was played, which is not as strong, but okay. Takes, queen takes, king f7, knight e5. And here black plays a horrendous move. Black plays king f8. I'm not sure what he was really thinking here. Because, okay, I know that white's next move is going to be a queen move. Because the queen is attacked, right? Where's the queen going to go? Probably to the h-file. Shouldn't I prevent the queen from mating me on the h-file? Like, that's just... This showed to me that black, I don't think, was thinking about what his opponent is going to do next. Because after king f8, like, you just wasted a move, right? Because I have a double mate threat. You have to go king g8. And this is just disaster. So knight e5, king g8 should be played, and white is seriously better. But after king f8, white is actually winning again. Because this loss of tempo is a game-losing loss of tempo. So pause your video if you'd like to find out how white can continue. So in this vision, white can just play simple chess. Rook c1. Bishop d7. I mean, what else? Your pieces have to do something at some point, right? Check. You have to go king h7 if you don't want to lose a piece. I'll take this, and the problem you have is after you take this, which you must if you don't want to lose a piece, it's just mate. Like, I don't see what you do. So white just wins here. Because of this lost tempo, white gets an extra move, rook c1, and that allows this mating attack. But after king f8, white again tried to rush things. He went with the check first instead of controlling squares. After knight g6, the king slips off. Here, with queen h5, I just control the squares, and the king doesn't get to run away. And that's a crucial detail. When you're attacking, the check is not always the best move. Oftentimes, the better move is some move that builds the net, weave the net around the king, and then give that decisive check. So knight g6, king e8, queen h5. But now black has, at least for now, evaded the checks. And here white, I think, plays a very good move, based on what we've just talking about. We don't want black's king to run away. That would be very sad. So white goes, no, king. You're not crossing the c-file. I'm going to stop you. You don't get to run away. You are stuck here in the center for the remainder of the game. This is a really good move. It develops a piece, and it controls squares around the king. Black goes bishop f6. I mean, it's hard to play for black. I would be looking for a way to develop this piece. Maybe move the queen somewhere. Try and trade queens like this. Put the king back here and put the bishop here. I think that the black player might have been worried about the queen giving up control of c7 some doubling on the c-file being possible here. But bishop f6 is not a terrible move, given the circumstances. I mean, black is just lost, right? There's only so much he can do here. But he's giving his king some space, guarding this square, which can be problematic on some knight e5 check ideas. It's probably a fine move. And now, as white, you have to decide how are you going to proceed with your attack. Because it looks very nice. You've caught this king in a box. You have aggressively placed pieces. But you're not winning just because of this. You have to find a way to break through. So in these moments, I like to look at what are the weaknesses in my opponent's position. And there's one point that immediately stands out as cripplingly weak in black's position, and that is the e6 point. So I think almost an automatic move for me here would be rook on f to e1, involving my last piece, he wasn't doing anything, and targeting black's weakest point. And the problem for black is he really doesn't have a good way to address this threat. Because my threat here is I'm just going to go knight f4, queen e2, or queen f7 even. That could be even more unpleasant. And you are just going to get slaughtered on this square. And what's really, really annoying for you, and maybe what the white player missed here, is that queen e8 is unplayable because white has a shot here, a rook e6. So we see very clearly on queen e6, that's a fork. On king e6, it's a skewer plus insurance. If you go to some other square, some dark square, I have this check. And if you go back, I pick up the queen with check. And your position is in shambles. You can resign. So this rook fe1 move carries very serious threats. And it's not terribly clear how black plans to address them, quite frankly. If you go queen g8, which is another try, I have a nice maneuver, queen e2, putting pressure, and I'm also hinting that maybe I'm going to give you this check, and that's not going to be fun. So, yeah, I mean, white's just winning here. But in the game, white failed to find this move, rook on f to e1, which I think is fairly logical, because it develops the last piece and attacks a weakness, and instead played rook c2, which is not as strong of a move. And the reason this is a less strong move is that the rook was already developed on the c-file, and even if I double the rooks, what are they really doing on the c-file? Like, I can't really come in on c7, excuse me, I can't come in on c6, so it seems like these rooks are sort of ineffective on the c-file and would actually be better placed on the e-file. So this rook c2 move is not accurate. The other thing I'll say is maybe it's possible that white was worried about bishop takes b2. But, I mean, really? That's not even a move I'm considering for black. If I play rook e1 and black wants to go bishop b2, I'm like, you're gonna play bishop b2? That was your move? I don't believe you. I mean, maybe now I go rook c2 with the idea of going rook on c to e2, putting tons and tons of pressure. And I think your position's literally collapsing. I don't see how you hold your material together. So rook c2 not necessary whatsoever. Black went king d6 here. his idea is he has to develop his pieces at some point. And here white, I think again, played a somewhat poor move. White played knight h8, which is a one-move threat. But black can easily address this threat. So, again, we have to figure out how we're going to proceed. So, I would think about my pieces. Who's doing well? He's a great piece. He's doing an important job. This is a wonderful piece, controlling these important dark squares around the king. I really don't want to move that knight, because that knight is doing a great job controlling the dark squares. So, I mean, we played rook c2. This is a logical move, right? Even if I can't get it on the c-file now, this is still a very attractive move to me. Although, perhaps it's slightly less good now because of bishop d7. But the other thing I realized is that my queen actually isn't doing very much. My queen is not accomplishing much on the h5 square. So I would also be looking at a move like queen f3. And if you're not careful, I'm going to give you a literally game-ending check on a3. This is the sort of check you have nightmares about. So play is very forced here. You don't want to allow the check. But now I'll just put my rooks on the e-file, pressure this, go knight f4, and you have some problems here. The engine points out that queen f3 was my idea. The engine points out that slightly more accurate, because the engine is a cruel beast, is the move queen h3. A very nice move. And the point is, after queen a5, rook e2, the queen has maintained on the h-file, so at some point queen h8 to f8 becomes a very nasty threat. Not what you want to see. So all of these were good moves, I think. Knight h8, I don't think is such a good move, because the knight was super well placed, and black does not play f4, I'll tell you that much. But black can easily parry the threat. Say black goes king e7, right? I mean, I think white has to repeat here. So that's clearly not what white wants. White doesn't want a threefold draw. But I think black also plays an acceptable move, queen g8. This move brings the queen out of the tactic and provides support for the e6 pawn, which is oftentimes problematic, as we've talked about. And here white goes knight f7 check. That was the point, right? King e7. And rook c7 check. Now, this move I'm not so sure about. Perhaps white, again, wasn't considering black's options here. Because after rook c7 check, black plays a move he's wanted to play for 20 moves, and that's bishop d7. He's been trying to play this move since the game started. And now you're forcing him to play it. And we see that white's pieces are not working harmoniously here. The queen and knight are attacking on the king side. The rook's over here on c7 on the queen side. He's also hanging. The knight is hanging. So, I'm sorry, the rook isn't hanging, but the rook is undefended, I should say. The knight is truly hanging. So, white has sown some discoordination in his pieces. And white saves the knight. And here, black goes king d6, attacking the undefended rook. And this is white's last chance to be better. If white doesn't play the right move here, white will be worse. White must go rook b7. And, I mean, why wouldn't we? It's a pawn. I'm still up the exchange from the opening. So let's get my pawn back. I'm just up in exchange. My pieces aren't as great as they once were, but I'll just carry this exchange into the endgame. And this is just a good position for white. It's basically a free exchange. But after the move played in the game, which is rook fc1, and maybe white sort of played this automatically. I know it's sort of a common pattern when your rook on the 7th is attacked. You want to play the other rook over so that you support that rook, and if the rook ever gets taken, you just bring the second rook to the 7th rank. But here, this is what I'm talking about when I say white's pieces are not coordinated. Black can interrupt the coordination of white's pieces with bishop c6. And the rook is trapped. The c7 rook is simply trapped. So white does the only thing he can do, which is give the rook. There's nothing else to be done. The rook is trapped. And all of a sudden, white's not better. White might actually be worse here, because he is materially down upon. Now, black's king is still somewhat vulnerable. Black has some weak dark squares, so white maybe has some compensation. But white now must play accurately to draw. And the other thing that's a little bit tricky here is that black actually has a sneaky little threat here. Black is threatening the move g6, which is going to cause problems for the coordination of the queen and knight here. So white tries the move knight f3, but there's an issue here. And the issue is your b2 pawn is hanging. So as white, you have to look for a more dynamic defense. And I would say this knight is still well placed. It's attacking a weakness on e6. But I don't want to allow g6 messing up the coordination of my pieces. So here, I would seriously consider the move h4. Not f4, because f4 would open this diagonal to my king. I would have problems on the dark squares at a future point. So go h4. This move does two things. I'm giving my king a little space, and I'm supporting my knight. So now if you go g6, I'll just move my queen to e2 probably, to targeting this weakness again. And my point is, yeah, you can go take this if you want, but then I'm coming for your e-pawn. And this is a little bit less clear, because if I get this e-pawn, then I have a good position. So, say rook e8, right? Defend the e-pawn. Now I just bring my queen back. I'm going to come over here, or maybe queen b3, and then check, get that guy. I have compensation, because this knight is so well placed. But after knight f3, as played in the game, white has no threat. White's not threatening rook e1, because there's nothing attacking e6. White is not threatening to put the knight anywhere, because the bishop is doing a good job covering all the dark squares. So I really don't understand black's next move. Black plays queen e8, which is offering to trade the queens. But if I were black, I would say that's a pawn. I mean, isn't it a pawn? To me, it's a pawn. I like pawns, especially in the endgame. If you give me free pawns in the endgame, I'm very happy about that. And I think white is starting to approach lost here. Now he's down 2 pawns. But okay, this opportunity was not taken. I mean, this is an important concept. When your opponent has no threats, you should take free material. Queen e8 played, offering to trade the queens. White says, no thank you, I would not like to trade the queens, that's a good decision, White needs to swindle. And, funnily enough, Black takes the pawn. But maybe what Black didn't realize is he's decided to take the pawn now that White has a threat. Because he might have missed this. This move, Queen h3, threatens a check. And this is not a pleasant check to meet. If the king moves from defense of the c-pawn, well, on king d7, I'd probably go knight e5 check, and that's a little bit unpleasant. On king e7, I'm just going to come and try and get in on your 7th rank. Not pleasant. And in the game continuation, e5, okay, I'll move my rook. You move your rook, great. And I got a pawn back. So I find it funny that Black went for the pawn as soon as it was dangerous. He didn't take it when it was free, he only took it when it was dangerous. Just a little strange decision there. And here, Black goes e4, attacking the knight. And also, there's a discovered attack here. And it's time to calculate endings. Now, White might have been very low on time here. It's very possible. But if I'm the White player, I'm looking to draw this position. I'm trying to bail out. And I need to calculate if I can get a rook or a queen ending. Because rook or queen endings give me good drawing chances. So the first move I would look at here is a capture. Because we look at our captures, rook b2. Well, I mean, you can look at these checks, of course. Or, well, not that check. You can look at this check, which was played in the game. Not that check, either. That would not be a good check. Queen h6 check. But the problem with this move, and it's a very bad move, is that it allows Black to force a non-queen ending. After queen e6, you have to take, you have too much hanging. But this is a disaster. And White actually wins a pawn here, but it's still a disaster. Because after knight d4 check, king d7, knight takes f5, c5, material is equal, but Black's pawns are so much more advanced than White's pawn. And we actually talked about this in the first video, about how in the ending we can evaluate on who's going to create a passed pawn and whose pawns are more advanced. And it's clear that Black is much better because he has much more advanced pawns. So this check that White gave was not a good move. You need to calculate rook b2. And we see that we arrive at a queen ending by force. And how to evaluate this position? So Black has connected passed pawns. White has a passed pawn. But Black's king is also on an open board here. So as the White player, I would think that I have drawing chances here. That doesn't mean it's a draw, but I would think that I have good chances to draw here. Whereas in this ending that arises after queen h6, queen e6, takes, check, boom. This ending, I don't think I have drawing chances. I think I have really good chances to lose, but I don't think I'm going to draw this ending. These pawns are just very, very fast, and it's very problematic for White. So queen h6 check, a very poor move, not either failing to calculate or failing to evaluate the endings correctly. And Black immediately blunders back with king c5. Perhaps being too afraid of losing a pawn But the endings are so winning for black, he should play queen e6. And now white actually has an opportunity. So I challenge you to pause the video. What would you play for white here? Here white actually has a fairly forced draw with the move knight g5. And knight e6 check is coming and is a problem. So you can try something like moving the bishop, say bishop a3. But after check, king c4 only move. This is actually a perpetual. On rook c1, check. If you step up, I just check you back and forth. So the only way to attempt to make progress is to go here. Notice that b5 is not a square because of the fork. So here, check. King a4. You can't step on either of these squares, which means I actually have a very strange perpetual here, because you are denied both these squares. And white draws just by force on knight g5. So after king c5, this allows a forced perpetual, which white missed. I don't really blame him. He was probably low on time, and it's not at all obvious that that's a perpetual. So white tried knight e1. I mean, I think this is a somewhat natural move, but the knight is so sad. I would at least try and look for more active possibilities. Bishop e5. And here, white again makes the mistake of giving checks he shouldn't. Whenever you give a check, you should ask yourself, did this really help my position? And queen e3 check, again, you're forcing black to play moves he wants to play. He wants to play d4. He wants to push his passed pawns. So I don't know why we're playing this check. We should instead get this rook out of here. I mean, white's still worse, but at least we didn't help our opponent play the move he wanted to play. So queen e3, not a good move. Rook c1 now, but black's got no move he wants. And queen a3. Okay, I'm looking for this check. That one's a real check. If you watch my other video, that's not a baby check. He's real. So bishop d6 makes a lot of sense. Take a pawn. And now black goes queen e5, threatening mate. And again, I'm not sure about this move, because black is forcing white to make a move he wants to make. White wants some lift for his king. So after queen e5, black is forcing white to go g3. And white wanted to play this move anyway. So instead of queen e5, I mean, does white have a threat? I push my pawns. If you don't have a threat, I push my pawns. I can do that all day, by the way. I'm good at pushing pawns. So after queen e5, white went queen f7 check, which I would go g3, but queen f7, sure. The problem is after queen e6, you can't trade queens. You should go back. White traded queens, but you can't do that. The ending is just so lost. And we've already talked about how having advanced pawns is just winning. And I sympathize with this. I have a feeling that the white player was very low on time and was sort of panic trading here. This happens a lot. When people are low on time, they often tend to simplify the position, whether or not it's good for them. So this is clearly terrible for black, because, or sorry, clearly terrible for white, because black's pawns are so much better than white's pawns. But he's probably in a lot of time pressure and being like, okay, if it's simpler, I can deal with it. But the issue that white has is perhaps he was counting on taking this pawn, but you just can't. Because if you take this pawn, the rook comes down, king f1, and I can just play this move, and I'm going to bring my bishop here, and you're losing material. So that's a disaster. So white went h4, but now I guard my pawn. g3, I guess. I don't really understand this move. But the position's lost. What are you going to do? d3. The pawn's just coming. Knight g2. Knight e3. c5. Check. Takes. Why are we taking that? I mean, you can at least force black to find some more good moves. Since he can't go back here, he has to go king e6. This is at least annoying for black. But after takes, I mean, again, white is simplifying, but it's just, he's simplifying into a lost ending. And here black plays, just finishes the game. Rook b2, rook a2, the pawns come, he takes a pawn, because why not? Check, and he takes another pawn, and the pawns just run. And white resigns. So a really interesting game here. White had massive winning chances, but he kept checking his opponent instead of corralling his opponent, instead of building the net around him. And the other thing that I thought white didn't quite do properly in this game was he didn't target weaknesses. When you're attacking, you have to attack something. So it's great to play moves like rook c2 and say I'm doubling on the c-file, but you're not attacking anything on the c-file. It makes a lot more sense to put those rooks on the e-file and then say I'm going to take your e6 pawn. What are you going to do about it? So some inaccurate play from white there. And I think for the black player, I think the lesson is really like, think about what's good about your position. That knight on d4 is sort of the pride of your position out of the opening. It's the reason that you're willing to sacrifice the exchange. This knight on d4 is so important. So giving up this knight makes no sense. And your bishop is also sad. So just paying more attention to your pieces, making sure your good pieces stay on the board, and improving your bad pieces. That's something you can always do when you don't know what to do in a position. Because after knight f5, black's position is just really terrible. And then black compounds it by not controlling the e5 square. So some lessons to be learned for both sides. But I loved this game. It was exciting, super instructional. I hope you learned something. And I'll be back with more Lichess4545 coverage in another video. Thank you all very much.